let's talk about Tourette syndrome. So, by mentioning Tourette syndrome, you might be thinking now it's of someone who swears explosively, uses lots of colourful words in response to seemingly nothing. This has actually got a name. It's called coprolalia, which comes from the Greek words of meaning poop, dog, which I guess is quite fitting, really, considering the language. And yes, it is one of the most obvious symptoms of Tourette's, but it's not the most common one, believe it or not. It's a lot more complex than you might think. Scientists are still trying to find out what is happening in the brain. The brain is a very complex organ. And what causes it. The DSM-5 classifies Tourette's syndrome, which is also known as Tourette's disorder, and is a neurodevelopment motor disorder. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one. It was named after a French neurologist who first described it in a patient. To be diagnosed with Tourette's, you need to experience 2 or more motor or verbal tics to get a diagnosis. A sudden or quick movement or vocalization. Tourette's is described as having these tics multiple times a day and consistently or intermittently over the last 3 years. This is the criteria in the DSM-5. So, there are other diagnoses which are less common but equally as important to the individual or the person. Few tics have patterns, others do not. Tics are often described as extremely uncomfortable by the person who's doing it because it's like a muscle spasm, which, when witnessed, it does look quite frightening to some, very painful to them. It's impossible to resist. I myself have random words pop into my head that I have to vocalise, which is weird. Sometimes I can sort of mutter it to myself and get away with it. Sometimes I have to say it randomly because I'm almost compulsively have to do it. So think of it being like holding a sneeze, but instead of sneezing, you're saying something really mean about your friend's cat. It's just really bizarre. You just can't help yourself. These verbal tics are not always swearing. They could be just random words, like I said. Being a nurse, I often think of random medication. Strange, don't get it. It could be repetition of words that I've heard and other the sounds that I've heard during the day. This is also known as echolalia. That's a word you may have come across before. Similar to verbal tics, motor tics can be also involuntary or echo movements of others. They can also just be a movement and just random with no reason behind it. This is how crazy Tourette's can be. It's like someone is smacking their head against a wall or smacking their head with their hand. You know, it's just random and it happens. No one knows why. And it looks like someone's having a breakdown or a meltdown, but it's just a tic. Still very painful though. These verbal and motor tics can be quite dramatic. Like I said, like hitting and yelling inappropriately, moments of words, blue, can be embarrassing for people that are around you. But some people do learn to accept the individual and who they are. But on the other hand, many people have tics that are so small that they might not even realise it themselves that they have Tourette's. They just think it's a nervous twitch. And they can fly under the radar. And not diagnosed for the whole of their lives. They say it's about 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000 people worldwide may suffer with Tourette's. A study of about 3,500 people in 22 countries say men are 4.3 times more likely than women to be given a diagnosis of Tourette's. The average age of onset is thought to be around about the age of 6. That's when it first manifests. And research from Yale University in the States, a child study centre that followed 36 younger patients through their childhood, placed the peak of tic severity around the age of 10. And by the age of 18, nearly half of the patients involved in the study were basically tick free. So it's not as if you grow out of it, it's kind of, you learn to control it better. But that's not to say everybody can, just some. But even though it's more common for children to be diagnosed with Tourette's and growing out of it, in some cases, many adults, as I said, suffer from it and can experience symptoms later in life. It's also worth mentioning that people diagnosed with Tourette's more often than not have comorbidities. For instance, in the same study of the 3,500 people, about 12% did not have comorbidities that occurred alongside it. But comorbidities could be like ADHD, OCD, autism, like myself. Now, Tourette's is a pretty intrusive illness, as you can imagine. If you're swearing at the top of your lungs and hitting yourself, it's painful to you, it's frightening for some to watch. But when it comes to day-to-day life, again, a study in Canada in the 80s discovered 40% of the respondents had no problem making friends, dating, forming relationships. So don't worry, there's hope. People will forgive some of the things you do. Once they get used to you, they forgive most of it. They can keep their relationships as well. They are good. So, because like I said, the person who's with them would understand them. So, even though spreading awareness, psychologists have been trying to find out what makes people tick biologically. We know that Tourette's has a strong genetic component, meaning parents have a chance of passing it on to their children, unfortunately. But we are not exactly sure what genes are involved, not yet. But research has also shown that around a third of patients did not inherit disorders with Tourette's. But as DNA sequences and learning more psychology, psychiatry and so forth, we will get to know more, which is always a good thing. Several cases of reports shown Tourette's surfacing and after a head trauma. So, some people even change languages, which I'm not sure the name of it, but I've heard of it, I'm sure you have. At the moment, scientists are not sure exactly what's happening to cause Tourette's in the brain, but like I said, they are looking into it. Many sources point to dysfunction in the basal ganglia, which is sort of in the middle of the brain somewhere. I have to get your anatomy books out for that one. This is a region responsible for voluntary movements and areas in the frontal lobe which are responsible for impulse control. So if they're damaged, you can see that people doing things with their hands or shouting is involuntary because these areas are not working as well as they should. But there is a lot of structure and functionalities in the different parts of the brain, across the whole brain, in patients with Tourette's. So it is hard to pinpoint with what particular network are fully to blame for it. In 2014 paper, scientists observed a wide range of activity in brain areas in seconds leading up to a motor or verbal tic when they were in an MRI scanner, and it was concluded that there might be an abnormality in the resting state network, a system made up of many brain areas working together. Different studies have noted changes in lots of different brain areas, so therefore you can see it's practically difficult to pin it down, but cases are getting worked on and better. So there are many different things that can cause Tourette's. There are many people that are understanding of Tourette's, and knowing that there are people out there looking after people with Tourette's or working with people with Tourette's, it's great to hear. Keep it up. Thank you very much.